Someone is watching you. Not in the way fear would have you believe. Not from the shadows. Not with harmful intentions. And yet, their eyes have returned to you more times than you realize. Even now, as you listen to these words, a quiet story is unfolding behind the scenes of your life. A story you were never meant to force. A story that has been moving gently, patiently, while you carried burdens nobody fully understood. Because there were nights when you sat alone in a silent room and wondered if anyone truly saw your sacrifices. The phone remained quiet. The invitations became fewer. The conversations felt shorter. And although you carried yourself with dignity, there were moments when your heart whispered a question you rarely spoke aloud. Have I been forgotten? But you were not forgotten. Not then. Not now. In fact, one of the greatest misunderstandings of your recent journey is believing that nobody noticed what you have endured. Someone did. Someone noticed the strength it took to keep going when disappointment tried to settle permanently inside your heart. Someone noticed the prayers you spoke without words. The tears you quickly wiped away. The courage you showed when you smiled for others while carrying concerns of your own. And what makes this even more remarkable is that the person watching was not looking for perfection. They were watching because they recognized something rare. A quiet grace. A resilience that cannot be taught. A light that continues shining even after life has tested it again and again. Yet there is something else you need to understand. They did not begin watching recently. This story began much earlier. Long before you suspected anything. Long before certain conversations took place. Long before a decision was made that would eventually affect both of your lives. And that is where the mystery begins. Because while you believed certain doors had closed forever, someone else was quietly wondering whether those doors had ever truly closed at all. They remembered things you assumed were forgotten. A conversation. A kindness. A moment that seemed ordinary to you. But that moment remained with them. Months passed. For some, years. Life continued moving. Responsibilities grew heavier. Families changed. People moved in different directions. Yet the memory stayed. And this is what nobody told you. Some connections do not disappear simply because time passes. Sometimes they become quieter. Sometimes they move beneath the surface where they cannot easily be seen. But they continue shaping hearts in ways nobody expects. If this sounds familiar, it may be because you have felt something shifting lately. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just a subtle feeling. A sense that something unfinished is beginning to stir again. You cannot explain it. You only feel it. And there is a reason for that. Because events have already begun aligning in ways you cannot yet see. A conversation has taken place. A name has resurfaced. A thought that was pushed aside has returned. And someone has found themselves revisiting a question they believed had already been answered. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The moment that changed everything happened later. It happened quietly. Without an announcement. Without anyone recognizing its significance. Picture a peaceful evening. The day's responsibilities have finally settled. The noise has faded. The room is still. And in that stillness, a realization arrives. Unexpected. Uninvited. Impossible to ignore. The realization that some people leave impressions that never fully disappear. That realization did not bring confusion. It brought clarity. Suddenly, certain memories made sense. Certain feelings made sense. Certain choices made sense. And for the first time in a very long while, someone stopped asking whether they should think about you. And started asking why they never stopped. Yet what happened next was never meant to be revealed so soon. Because the answer led toward a hidden truth. A truth involving another conversation. Another person. And a surprising discovery that would explain why your name has recently been spoken in a place you would never expect. What was said in that conversation is the piece that changes everything. And before you hear it, you must understand who was listening. The room was quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty. The kind that carries unspoken thoughts. The kind that arrives when a person can no longer distract themselves from what their heart has been trying to say. And in that moment, your name entered a conversation you never knew was taking place. Not accidentally. Not casually. It surfaced because someone asked a question. A simple question. Yet the answer would begin uncovering emotions that had remained hidden for far too long. At first, the discussion seemed ordinary. A few memories were shared. A few observations were exchanged. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would seem significant to an outsider. But beneath those words, something deeper was happening. Because each memory carried a feeling. And each feeling revealed a truth. The truth that your presence had left a lasting mark. Not because you demanded attention. Not because you sought recognition. But because of who you were when nobody was looking. Your kindness during difficult seasons. Your patience when others became impatient. Your ability to continue loving even after disappointment. These things were remembered. More clearly than you realize. And as the conversation continued, another surprising detail emerged. There were people who had been quietly observing your journey from a distance. Not judging. Not criticizing. Simply noticing. They noticed how many times you chose grace instead of bitterness. They noticed how often you carried responsibilities without complaint. They noticed how you kept moving forward despite unanswered questions. The questions that lingered long after everyone else had moved on. The questions that followed you into quiet mornings and sleepless nights. Why did certain doors close? Why did certain relationships drift away? Why did some prayers seem delayed? For a long time, those questions felt heavy. But what you could not see was that those unanswered moments were revealing something about your character. They were showing people who you truly were. And someone was paying close attention. Yet this story is not only about who was watching. It is also about what they discovered. Because the more they reflected on your journey, the more they began recognizing something unexpected. You were not defined by what happened to you. You were defined by how you responded. That realization changed everything. Suddenly, old assumptions began falling apart. Certain beliefs no longer made sense. Stories they had told themselves no longer felt true. And this created a new mystery. If their understanding of you had been incomplete, what else had they misunderstood? That question became impossible to ignore. So they began looking back. Back through moments they once overlooked. Back through conversations they barely remembered. Back through decisions that seemed settled long ago. And with every step backward, a larger picture started coming into focus. A picture that revealed something astonishing. There were details hidden in plain sight. Signals that had been missed. Feelings that had been dismissed. Opportunities that had been misunderstood. But there was one memory in particular that refused to stay buried. One moment that kept returning. Again and again. At first, they tried to ignore it. Life had responsibilities. Schedules. Commitments. Practical concerns. Yet the memory remained. Like a gentle knock that would not stop. Like a chapter that refused to end. And eventually they understood why. Because that memory held a truth they had never fully acknowledged. A truth connected to you. Now listen carefully. This is where many people make a mistake. They assume meaningful change arrives with grand announcements. They expect dramatic events. Instant answers. Sudden transformations. But some of life's most significant turning points begin quietly. A realization. A conversation. A single decision. A moment when someone finally becomes honest with themselves. And that moment was approaching. Closer than either of you realized. If you have ever felt overlooked. If you have ever wondered whether your patience mattered. If you have ever questioned whether your efforts were seen. This is your reminder. Nothing offered with sincerity is ever wasted. The compassion you gave. The forgiveness you extended. The strength you showed. All of it left traces. Even when nobody thanked you. Even when nobody acknowledged it. Even when you believed nobody noticed. Because someone noticed. And now those memories are leading them toward a realization they can no longer avoid. But that was not the discovery that changed everything. The discovery that changed everything arrived when another person entered the picture. Someone connected to the story in a way you would never expect. Someone who revealed a piece of information that had remained hidden for years. The moment those words were spoken, the entire situation looked different. Past decisions suddenly carried new meaning. Old disappointments suddenly looked incomplete. And the reason someone has been quietly watching you became far more surprising than anyone imagined. What that person revealed was not a secret about you. It was a secret about. The secret was never about who you were. It was about what others failed to see. For years, a certain story had been accepted as truth. A story built on assumptions. Incomplete conversations. Moments taken out of context. And like many stories that travel through time, it slowly drifted away from reality. The surprising part is that nobody intended for this to happen. Life simply moved quickly. People filled in missing pieces with their own interpretations. Questions went unasked. Answers remained unspoken. And eventually, what was assumed became what was believed. But now, someone was uncovering details that did not fit the old narrative. Details that created more questions than answers. Why had certain events unfolded the way they did? Why had misunderstandings lasted so long? And why did every path seem to lead back to you? The more they searched for clarity, the more impossible it became to dismiss. There was a connection hidden beneath everything. A thread quietly woven through years of experiences. Not a dramatic force. Not something magical. Simply the undeniable impact one life can have on another. You may not realize this, but some of the most meaningful influence happens without recognition. A kind word offered during someone's difficult season. A moment of encouragement when another person was losing hope. A gesture so small that you barely remember it. Yet that gesture becomes a turning point in someone else's story. That is what was beginning to emerge. The realization that your presence had mattered far more than anyone understood. And when that realization surfaced, emotions followed. Not regret. Not sadness. Something deeper. Gratitude. The kind of gratitude that arrives when someone finally understands the value of what they almost overlooked. Picture someone sitting quietly, reflecting on years gone by. Photographs. Conversations. Memories resurfacing one by one. The room is still. The evening light stretches across the floor. And suddenly, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You were present in more meaningful moments than they remembered. Moments of comfort. Moments of encouragement. Moments that helped shape important decisions. At the time, those moments seemed ordinary. Now they appeared extraordinary. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while they were looking back at the past, something was already beginning to change in the present. Without your knowledge. Without any announcement. Without a single warning. New conversations were forming. Different perspectives were emerging. People who once remained silent were beginning to speak. And among those conversations, your name appeared again. Only this time, the tone was different. There was warmth, respect, curiosity, a growing recognition that perhaps not everything had been understood correctly. Yet another mystery remained. Why now? Why after all this time? Why were these realizations happening at this particular moment? The answer is simpler than most people expect. Because hearts often need time to mature. Wisdom rarely arrives in a hurry. Some truths can only be recognized after years of experience. After disappointments. After lessons. After enough life has been lived to understand what truly matters. And that is exactly what was happening. People were seeing through a different lens now. The things that once seemed important no longer carried the same weight. The qualities that were overlooked before suddenly became invaluable. Patience. Loyalty. Compassion. Steadiness. The ability to remain kind when life gives every reason not to. Those qualities never go out of style. In fact, time often reveals their true worth. If you have felt unseen lately, hear this clearly. The seasons when you thought nothing was happening were not empty seasons. Growth was taking place. Healing was taking place. Understanding was taking place. Even when you could not see evidence of it. And perhaps that is why this message found you today. Not to convince you that life will suddenly become perfect. Not to promise instant answers. But to remind you that delayed understanding is not the same as permanent loss. Some things require time before their meaning becomes visible. Yet there is one detail nobody has uncovered completely. One final piece that remains hidden. The piece that explains why someone began watching you so carefully in the first place. Because it was never simple curiosity. It was never coincidence. And it was never merely a memory. There was a specific moment. A moment so small that you may not even remember it. But that moment changed the way someone saw you forever. What happened during that moment would eventually influence a decision. A decision that is now closer than ever. And when that decision is finally made, several unanswered questions from your past will suddenly connect together. But before that happens, you need to know what occurred on the day when everything quietly began. The day a single unexpected act revealed something about your heart that nobody had ever seen before. And the person who witnessed it was. The person who witnessed it was not who you would expect. They were not standing at the center of your life. They were not someone you were trying to impress. In fact, there is a good chance you gave that moment very little thought afterward. To you, it was simply another day. Another ordinary interaction. Another small choice among thousands you have made throughout the years. But to them, it became unforgettable. The day itself seemed unremarkable. The sky carried the soft colors of an ordinary afternoon. People moved through their routines. Conversations came and went. Nothing appeared different. Yet hidden inside that ordinary day was a moment that would remain in someone's memory long after everything else faded. You noticed someone struggling. Not dramatically. Not publicly. The kind of struggle many people miss because they are too focused on themselves. A tired expression. A quiet disappointment. A burden carried behind a polite smile. You could have walked past it. Most people would have. Instead, you paused. You listened. You offered kindness without expecting anything in return. No audience. No recognition. No reward. Just simple human compassion. And then you moved on with your day. You likely forgot about it soon afterward. But the person who witnessed it never did. Because what they saw challenged something they believed. For years, they had measured people by accomplishments. By status. By appearances. By what could be seen from the outside. Yet in that brief moment, they saw something far more valuable. Character. The kind that reveals itself when nobody is watching. The kind that cannot be purchased. The kind that grows quietly through hardship, faith, patience, and grace. That single observation stayed with them. And over time, it became a reference point. Whenever they heard your name. Whenever they remembered your presence. Whenever life brought your path back into their thoughts. That moment returned. Again and again. Yet what nobody realized was that this memory was slowly influencing other people too. Because stories have a way of traveling. Not always through formal conversations. Sometimes through subtle remarks. Unexpected praise. A passing observation shared at exactly the right moment. Your actions had created ripples you never saw. And those ripples reached farther than you imagined. This is one of life's quiet mysteries. You rarely witness the full impact of your own goodness. You see the effort. You feel the sacrifice. But you seldom see the hearts touched along the way. You seldom see the encouragement you leave behind. You seldom see the hope you restore in others. And because you cannot see it, you sometimes assume it does not exist. But it does. More often than you know. If this message resonates with you, perhaps it is because there were seasons when you wondered whether your kindness mattered. Perhaps you grew tired of giving. Tired of waiting. Tired of carrying hope through disappointments that seemed never-ending. Yet those seasons were shaping something remarkable inside you. Not weakness. Not resignation. Wisdom. The kind of wisdom that only emerges after life teaches difficult lessons. The kind that allows a person to remain gentle without becoming fragile. And that wisdom has not gone unnoticed. Now another layer of the story begins to reveal itself. Because the person watching was not the only one paying attention. There was someone else. Someone connected through family. Someone whose opinion carries more weight than you realize. For a long time, this individual remained in the background. Observing. Listening. Saying very little. But recently, something changed. A conversation took place. One that began innocently enough. A few memories were exchanged. A few names were mentioned. Then your name entered the discussion. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Not because of controversy. Not because of conflict. Because of recognition. A recognition that surprised everyone present. As stories surfaced and memories returned, a realization slowly spread through the room. Different people had reached the same conclusion independently. Different experiences. Different perspectives. Yet somehow they all described the same qualities. The same strength. The same warmth. The same steady presence. And suddenly, what seemed like separate observations formed a larger picture. A picture nobody could ignore any longer. But that was not the moment that changed everything. The moment that changed everything arrived when one person asked a question. A simple question. A question so direct that the room fell silent. No one answered immediately. Because everyone understood what the question implied. And in that silence, a truth that had been hidden for years finally began rising to the surface. A truth about why certain events unfolded the way they did. A truth about why someone never completely stopped thinking about you. And a truth about the decision that is now quietly approaching. The answer to that question revealed something nobody expected. Something that explains why your story is moving toward a turning point right now. And the first person to speak after that silence was the one nobody expected. Not the most outspoken voice in the room. Not the person who usually led the conversation. In fact, they had spent most of the evening quietly listening. Observing. Reflecting. Allowing others to share their thoughts first. Yet when they finally spoke, every person present paid attention. Because there was a calm certainty in their voice. The kind that comes from experience. The kind that comes from seeing life unfold over many years. For a moment, they looked down at their hands. As though gathering memories before turning them into words. Then they said something that changed the entire direction of the conversation. They said that some people spend their lives searching for qualities they fail to recognize when they are standing right in front of them. The room grew still. No one interrupted. No one rushed to respond. Because deep down, everyone understood the meaning behind those words. They were not speaking about missed opportunities. They were speaking about perspective. About how wisdom often arrives long after certainty has faded. And as the conversation continued, a remarkable pattern emerged. Each person remembered something different about you. One recalled your patience during a difficult season. Another remembered your kindness when someone needed encouragement. Someone else spoke about your quiet strength during a time when others would have given up. Different memories. Different circumstances. Yet all pointing toward the same truth. The impression you left behind was far deeper than you realized. And for the person who had been quietly watching from a distance, this realization became impossible to ignore. Because suddenly, what they had been feeling in private was being confirmed by others. People who had no reason to exaggerate. No reason to persuade. No reason to influence the outcome. Yet their observations aligned perfectly. And this created an unexpected emotional shift. Not excitement. Not urgency. Something more meaningful. Clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when scattered pieces finally begin fitting together. For years, questions had lingered. Questions about timing. About choices. About paths that seemed to separate and reconnect in unexpected ways. Now those questions were beginning to find answers. But before those answers could fully emerge, another mystery surfaced. Because someone in that room revealed a detail that had never been discussed before. A detail connected to a period of your life when you felt particularly alone. A season when you wondered whether anyone understood what you were carrying. The responsibilities. The disappointments. The silent battles that never appeared on the surface. You thought those struggles belonged only to you. You thought no one saw them. Yet someone did. Someone had been paying attention far more closely than you realized. And what they observed during that season left a lasting impression. Not because everything went perfectly. But because of how you handled what was difficult. You kept showing up. You kept believing. You kept extending grace when bitterness would have been easier. That resilience became part of the story people remembered. And this is something many hearts need to hear. The moments you survive often become more meaningful than the moments you celebrate. The quiet victories. The unseen courage. The prayers whispered when no one else was around. These are the things that shape your legacy. These are the things people remember long after circumstances change. If you have ever felt weary from carrying burdens others could not see, this is your reminder that your journey has not been invisible. Not to the people who truly matter. Not to the hearts that were paying attention. And certainly not to the one who has been guiding you through every chapter. Yet what happened next surprised everyone. Because the conversation stopped being about the past. It turned toward the future. Toward possibilities. Toward decisions that had not yet been made. One by one, people began considering a question that had never been seriously discussed before. What if certain chapters were not finished after all? What if time had not been creating distance? What if it had been creating understanding? The room became quiet again. But this silence felt different. It was not uncertainty. It was reflection. The kind of silence that appears when hearts begin recognizing a truth before words can fully express it. And then, from across the room, someone shared one final observation. A single sentence. Simple. Honest. Yet powerful enough to change everything that followed. The moment those words were spoken, the person who had been secretly watching you felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Not doubt. Not hesitation. Hope. Because for the first time, they realized the obstacle standing between yesterday and tomorrow was never what they believed. And when they finally understood what the real obstacle had been, one decision immediately came to mind. A decision they can no longer postpone. A decision connected to a message. A message that has not yet been sent. And the name written at the top of that message was. The name written at the top of that message was yours. For a long moment, nothing happened. The words remained unsent. The screen remained still. And the person staring at that message found themselves caught between the past and the future. Not because they lacked courage. Not because they were uncertain about what they felt. But because they understood the weight of reaching out after so much time. They knew some moments cannot be rushed. Some conversations deserve care. Some words deserve honesty. So instead of pressing send, they paused. And in that pause, they began asking themselves questions they had avoided for far too long. Questions about timing. Questions about understanding. Questions about whether they had truly seen your journey clearly. Because the more they reflected, the more they realized something profound. The story they carried about you had changed. Years ago, they saw only pieces. Now they saw the whole picture. Not perfection. Not flawlessness. Something far more beautiful. Growth. The growth that comes through disappointment. The wisdom that comes through waiting. The grace that develops when life asks more of you than you thought you could give. And suddenly, everything looked different. The moments that once seemed insignificant now carried meaning. The seasons that appeared empty now revealed purpose. The delays that once felt frustrating now appeared necessary. Because certain understandings could only arrive with time. And perhaps you know something about that yourself. Perhaps there were seasons when you looked around and wondered why life seemed slower than expected. Why certain prayers lingered without answers. Why certain doors remained closed. Why certain people drifted away. At the time, it felt confusing. Sometimes painful. Yet what you could not see was that those seasons were preparing hearts. Not only yours. Other hearts as well. Hearts that still needed lessons. Perspective. Maturity. The ability to recognize what truly matters. And that preparation was finally reaching its conclusion. Yet there remained one final obstacle. Not a person. Not a circumstance. A fear. A quiet fear hidden beneath years of experience. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of reopening a chapter only to discover it belonged in the past. The fear of hoping for something meaningful and being disappointed once again. If you have ever carried that fear, you are not alone. Many people do. Especially those who have loved deeply. Especially those who have given generously. Especially those who have endured seasons that tested their faith. The heart becomes cautious. Not because it has stopped caring. Because it remembers. And this is where a beautiful realization began to emerge. The purpose of healing is not to erase the past. It is to free you from being controlled by it. That realization settled deeply. Not only in your life. In theirs as well. For the first time, they understood that courage is not the absence of uncertainty. Courage is moving forward despite uncertainty. It is choosing honesty over silence. It is choosing possibility over endless wondering. And once that understanding arrived, the message in front of them no longer felt impossible. It felt necessary. Not because they expected a particular outcome. Not because they wanted to rewrite history, but because some truths deserve to be spoken. Some gratitude deserves to be expressed. Some connections deserve clarity. And there was something else. Something they had not admitted even to themselves until now. The reason they kept watching was never simply curiosity. It was admiration. Admiration for the way you continued moving forward. Admiration for the way you handled difficult seasons. Admiration for the strength hidden beneath your quiet moments. The more they understood this, the more one truth became impossible to deny. You had changed their perspective. Without trying. Without knowing. Without ever asking for credit. And that realization carried them toward a decision. A decision that felt less like a risk and more like an answer. The answer to a question that had lingered for years. What happens when appreciation remains unspoken for too long? What happens when understanding arrives later than expected? What happens when two paths that once drifted apart begin moving toward the same horizon again? The message was still open. The cursor was blinking. The words were ready. And then something unexpected happened. Before they could send it, a response arrived from a completely different direction. A response connected to someone close to you. Someone who had recently noticed a change. Someone who had quietly uncovered a truth neither of you realized was visible. The moment that person shared what they had observed, everything accelerated. Because what they revealed confirmed something that had remained uncertain until now. Something about your heart. Something about your journey. And something about a prayer that has been unfolding far longer than either of you knew. The words they spoke were simple. Yet they changed everything. Because those words revealed that you had been carrying the exact same question. And neither of you knew the other was asking it.